students. Sorry, I forgot to say that. We would like to record this webinar so that we can share it afterwards, both in Spark Teachers and ELNE Foundation, but also ELNE would like to share it on their platforms as well. If you prefer not to be on the recording with your face, of course, you can turn off your camera, but otherwise we would really encourage you to turn on the camera because it will enhance like the interaction that we can feel during this webinar, and we really want to encourage for interaction both along the way, but also especially in the end when we ask you to come on with your questions as well. Yes, so who are Spark Teachers? A cross-European network of racialized teachers who all work in schools with students. We work actively with anti-racism, anti-discrimination. We work with decolonizing the curricula. And we are here today because we want to address how can school leadership in Europe support racialized teachers working in the profession. My name is Mette, and I am the chair of Spark Teachers. I am based in Copenhagen in Denmark, and I want to pass it on to the 3 members that I am so happy are here with me and will be part of this webinar. So we have P, Sony, and Michelle, and they're gonna introduce themselves. So I will start with passing it on to you, Peace.
Hello, everyone. I hope that you're all well. My name is Peace Chapura, and I am based out in Ireland. I am a newly qualified primary school teacher, and I am incredibly passionate about amplifying and uplifting the voices of minority teachers in Ireland, and really excited to be part of this webinar today. In Ireland, it's very clear that the teaching profession in Ireland is not so diverse, so it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to share a little bit about what the context is like in Ireland. I'd like to pass it on to Sonia.
Thanks, Peace. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Ronnie Hoare. I'm currently teaching and based in the Netherlands. I'm an English support teacher, but I also teach English language. And I wanted to be part of this webinar because still in 2025, we're not seeing our school staff, particularly our teaching and senior leadership staff, just reflects our rising pupil population of the global majority. And as a teacher myself of the global majority, I think it's just a fundamental problem to discuss. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Michelle.
Thanks, Sony. So my name is Michelle Codrington-Rogers. I've been teaching for 20 years. I teach citizenship at a large secondary school in England, or in Oxford in England. And I want to be a part of this webinar today because I know that there are members of racialized communities across Europe who fundamentally believe in the power of education. And for some reason, they're not coming into teaching. And so therefore, it's a joint approach is needed so that we can make sure that more racialized teachers from local communities are able to be successful teachers and be role models to children, not just from their own communities, but for children across the nation and across Europe.
Thank you so much to all 3 of you. Now we would like to engage you a little bit who have come here to join us for this webinar. So Isa, who we have here with us, who is working with ELNE Foundation, who are the foundation that is supporting and empowering Spark Teachers, and we are so happy to be part of that and for their support. She will now post a link for a Mentimeter poll in the chat, where we would like you to write the one thing that you would like to take away from this webinar. So you can see it as, why did you sign up for this webinar? What was kind of the motivation? What is the thing that you hope that you know more about when you leave this webinar? Feel free to click the link now, and there is a password code that you can enter. And then you just write the one word that describes what you hope to get out of this webinar today. And you can also use your phones. Yes, perspective. Challenges. Successful initiatives. Yeah, differences in Europe. Best practices, yeah. Systemic obstacles and knowledge. And I can also just stress, these are also things that we can elaborate in the Q&A, where you will also get a chance to put a few more words to this. Advice. Yeah. Great. I think you can still add in words if you haven't written words, right? I guess you can still add in words along the way. So feel free to do that. Now I just want to give a little bit of context to why did we suggest this webinar to ELNE? Why did we propose this webinar? So as we also see was written in the chat, and as we also heard the panelists share, we find ourselves in an educational reality in Europe that is rooted in whiteness. We see how the point of orientation also in education is centered around whiteness, centered around the history of whiteness, and looking at how do this create a foundation for how you can navigate different spaces. Depends on also how we are positioned in the classroom. It depends on what are we teaching the students. It depends on how do we get to engage in different conversations. It depends on like what are the support that we are able to get from colleagues, but also from the leadership, from the management. So all of this is something that we want to address in a network like this, where we do have people coming together who are setting the scene of the school that we are creating. It also, of course, is a huge point of like recruitment. So how does recruitment oftentimes risk to becoming an instrument of reproducing whiteness? So how, even if you are not carrying yourself in a white body, it's still that thing of how do you align with the processes and the procedures that would be considered part of whiteness. It's also a way that we would like to confront these structures that schools are rooted in. So how do we confront the sense of like comfortability that tends to be when we are addressing these conversations? So we wanted to have a seat at the table. We wanted to address these conversations as also that was also written here, like the different perspectives. The different perspectives is also about what are the voices that can be raised and how can these voices be raised, especially when we talked about how schools are rooted in the concept of whiteness. We also want to look a little bit into like how professionalism also can be seen as a racial construct. So how certain ideals are set up for professionalism, again, which could be rooted in this understanding of whiteness, and how there are certain standards for behavior, certain standards for how we communicate, how we appear, the ways we communicate, the language we communicate in, and so on and so forth. It can be really difficult as the only one or one in a few racialized teachers to confront this, because there can be a tendency to see the confrontation as the unprofessional behavior and not the racist remark or the racist approach or the colonial curriculum as the problem, but as the person that is confronting this problem as the one who is disrupting the comfort and thereby being the problem. So we want to have that conversation, and we really also want to invite all of you attending here to pose your questions and to share with us what you experience and how you see the local context that you are a part of in whatever country you are based in. So these are some of the questions that we are raising tonight, this afternoon. And basically, we are also looking into the recruitment and the retaining of racialized teachers. So what we would start with looking at now is actually we would like to ask you a question, because we would like to ask if the workplace that you are in, whether it's a school, it's a union, it's an institution or an organization, whatever you see yourself working in your daily life, do you have an anti-racism strategy or an anti-racism policy? You can find, again, a link for the Mentimeter in the chat, and we would like, of course, for you to be very honest with us here. Is it something you have already? It's the same link. Okay, so if you have the link already on your phone or elsewhere, you can just press the same link. But we really invite you to be honest. Is it something you have already? Is it something you don't have? Maybe even you can also share in the chat, maybe you never thought about that it would be relevant to have a policy or strategy like this. Then hopefully during this webinar, you will get more insights into why this is something we see in Spark Teachers as, of course, a necessity, not only for schools, but for everywhere. Yes. Yeah, never really thought about that. Thank you so much for your honesty, Monica. Because I think this is what many people experience, that maybe they have not been affected by it themselves, so they don't really see the importance of it. Yeah, so we can see here that no one has such strategy already implemented in the workplace. We see that most people work in places where there is none. And I can also say, from working in different schools, I also never experienced that there was one. In Denmark, we are currently trying to push the municipality in Copenhagen for implementing a requirement for all schools to have an anti-racism policy, just like they have an anti-bullying policy. So yes, thank you so much for sharing that. Now we're gonna dig into some of the more like specific questions. And first I want to ask the panelists about what similarities they see from their different contexts when it comes to challenges that are faced by racialized teachers. And I just want to remind you that we do represent different countries across Europe. And Peace, I would like to hear your take on this. So which similarities do you see that racialized teachers face when it comes to challenges?
I believe, regardless of what the different countries we are all based in, that something that is consistent and reflects all the different experiences of racialized teachers is the burden of being that source of representation. And I believe this stems from the fact that there are not that many racialized teachers in many of the different countries we're all based in. Like, if I give a statistic, in Ireland, 98% of primary school teachers in Ireland identify as white Irish. So in my experience, I was one of the only Black individuals in my graduating year, out of over 400. So that experience of being that source of representation when I was in college and having to share and having to share about what it's like for minority students in Ireland, I really felt that sense of pressure, and I wasn't even working in the profession at that time. I would even say that when I would be out on school placements, which would have been in many different schools, that it seems like as if there's this additional labor that is sometimes not really acknowledged or respected when it comes to, for example, when I would be out like subbing in different types of schools, one thing I had noticed very early on is how comfortable students of minority backgrounds would be in telling me about their experiences if there was perhaps like a racist incident that happened. And when I would ask like, oh, did you tell like your class teacher, they would be quick to let me know that no, they hadn't. And I think this came from the fact that maybe they felt like that I would be able to relate to them. So I think that's something that is a challenge that comes to mind faced by racialized teachers. I would like to pass it on to Sonina.
Thanks, Peace. So yeah, just to kind of reiterate Peace's points, I'm gonna address sort of three. But yeah, first starting with sort of the burdening, just with the responsibility of addressing issues concerning racism that a lot of our students of color face within schools. Or even topics within diversity. So if there is, you know, diversity training, or it's to be covered in the school sort of community in some way, often we're called upon then, but apart from that, we don't seem to have much input, or there isn't much feedback gathered from us in terms of the overall processes and how that develops over time, and to, you know, see it long term. So yeah, so again, kind of our value and where we are used and where we aren't used. The other point is sort of our knowledge and our experience being undermined. So a lot of the time, or yeah, in my experience, there's a lot of racialized teachers who are undermined by their sort of white peers, when often they are more qualified or more knowledgeable in various areas. However, they struggle far more to access the same opportunities or career progression within the school or institutions that they're in, and also will be underpaid compared to their white counterparts as well. And this can be often the case in European and international schools, where also there's kind of a disparity between salary. So sometimes there will be it will be dependent on sort of your nationality, so which passport you hold essentially, and your visas and what kind of visa category you can fall into as well. So you might be very knowledgeable or qualified outside of Europe. However, because you hold a specific passport, you might not receive the same passport a British person or perhaps an American person would hold. So yeah, that's another issue. And then I think just kind of coming back to what you mentioned earlier about our about professionalism. So often just being policed, you know, in every aspect, and facing kind of criticism or not maybe receiving praise as often as we would with our white counterparts as well. When, like Peace has mentioned, we work hard, if not harder, than a lot of our you know, peers as well. So yeah, that's another sort of disparity between staff amongst schools. I'll pass it on to Michelle.
Thank you, Peace and Sonny. I think from the UK perspective, we have been a multicultural country for so long, and yet increasingly the Black teachers and the racialized teachers who are in the classroom are leaving the classroom because they feel unsupported, exactly for the reasons that were said before. They feel that they experience racism and the schools aren't backing them up. Even if they have got policies, they're not putting the policies in place, and often then it becomes the one teacher's responsibility rather than a school cultural issue. One of the things I found really interesting, because I've had an opportunity to work with teachers from across Europe, and even when it comes down to terminology, so this idea that anybody who's racialized must be a migrant or must be a refugee or an asylum seeker, when actually minoritized communities have been existing in Europe for not even just decades, but centuries. And we know we've been here, we've got the roots in the culture, but we've always been treated as other, which then means that we're battling back against this idea of whether or not we belong to nationality, whether we belong to that country, whether we fully understand it. But actually, we are in a really unique position where we bring together cultural norms and cultural expectations, as well as living in the country that we live in as well. And sometimes, as I think Meta said, this idea of how we present. We are policed. We're policed on what we wear. We're policed on the language that we use, on the accents that we have. We're even policed on what kind of hairstyles we have. And you know, while we're battling against that, and we just want to be in the classroom, it's been mentioned that racialized teachers don't get progression enough. And in Scotland, we believe there's 2, if not only 1, racialized head teacher. In Wales, I think there's less than 5, and in England, there's less than, I'm looking at my numbers, I think there's less than 20. And this is in a country which, you know, basically wrote the model on how to colonize and to bring people into the empire, and yet certain opportunities aren't being opened and kept held open for us. There was a report that was published in the UK in January 2024, and it highlights the fact that teachers of color or racialized teachers are maybe being recruited into the profession, but they're not staying, and it's a disproportional number. A number of our colleagues end up going into cover supervisors or temporary teacher roles rather than staying attached to a school, and that's a huge issue as well, because lots of them do want to have permanent contracts and do want to, you know, want to be teachers, because as I said previously, education is so important to our communities. It's something that we see as something very valuable. It's something that shows that we belong, that we're a part of, but also it's that idea that education opens opportunities, and we all of us want our children and grandchildren to do better than we are doing. But when there's barriers that racialized communities have to face, where even racialized teachers aren't being given the opportunities, and those barriers are going to be constantly maintained and used to stop us going into the classroom.
Great, thank you so much to all 3 of you. I think my internet broke up for a minute, so, but thank you so much for sharing. And I think this is also what you're all 3 talking about, is also speaking into this whole thing, how the institution is set up for whiteness, right? So that thing of like, and whiteness not only being a skin color, whiteness is also like a set of norms, a set of like history, a set of like the way we do things, a set of how we navigate the world, what becomes the origin, right? So I also want to ask you a question around, like, so in terms of what is the support that is needed, there are different support systems set up to support teachers, but that whole idea of like the whiteness being the foundation, then when we think of a teacher, that would be a white teacher, and all the needs and the wants and the development of what a white teacher would need, like white in terms of norms, cultural background, all these kind of things. So I'm curious to also hear you about what kind of collaboration do you think would be needed from school leaders, from unions? It could also be from colleagues, whether they be racialized or like minorities or racialized majorities. It could also be from academic institutions, both in terms of the research that comes out of these institutions, but also in terms of how teachers are trained. Pete, you already touched a little bit upon it, right? About like, how was it for you to be in the teachers training academy, but how do we want to see teachers being trained, whether they are like teachers inspired, or if they are teachers already out there being professionally developed to tackle this, also because we do see student populations being more and more diverse as well, right? So I think let's try and start, maybe Sonia, if you want to kick us off here with this. So what kind of collaboration would you like to see as a racialized teacher? So both for yourself, but also I think for racialized teachers more broadly.
Yeah, so I kind of address that question by in three ways. So what I would like to see from school leaders or within a school setting, within unions, and then three, within academic institutions. So I'll start first within the school setting. I think straight off the bat, it just has to be transparent and thoughtful policies that are separate from any other pastoral or pastoral policy. Sorry. So anti-racism is a safeguarding issue. It is violence. Racism is violence. So it has to be a standalone policy. And I want to underline the word thoughtful, because in the way the policy needs to be written and there needs to be information and procedures within those policies, they need to be clear and they need to be transparent and they need to be disseminated to parents, to school staff, to everyone who's going to be using this policy, again, thoughtfully, very clearly, but also with an opportunity to have sort of clarity, guidance, room for questioning, training, etc. So I think that's kind of like my first expectation or something I'd like to see. With unions, I think it would be nice for them to be maybe more visible for racialized students during the PGC and SCIT courses. So offering maybe regular one-to-one support, guidance, and assisting with the lectures and seminars or modules within your PGC course. Especially dedicated to kind of what you touched upon, Met, in the beginning, professionalism, because it's very different. And I talk about my own experience doing a PGC in the way professionalism, again, that was delivered by a white man, is presented in a lecture to then what the expectations are and how that is followed within a school setting. And it's a very lonely place. So when you go into a school to do your placements, you are alone. Like, it's a very lonely place. And I think for racialized teacher trainers, that it's even more overwhelming. So yeah, just more sort of visibility for racialized teachers from unions. And I think the third, for sort of academic institutions, I think there needs to be a deep sort of review of their courses and resources. So there needs, I would like a standalone anti-racism module within the PGCE course, which is, again, for all, not just for racialized students, but for everyone who is training to be a teacher and is going into schools. There should be a standalone anti-racism module, for everyone. So yeah, that's kind of my answers. I'll pass it on to Michelle.
I'm going to pick up right where you left it, Sonny. There's so much that could be said and is said. I mean, one of the most important things around teacher training and teaching training providers. So whether you're training new teachers in school directly or through a university or through a program, you need to not be afraid to talk about race. Shouldn't be afraid to talk about any of the forms of discrimination and prejudice that's out in wider society. We need to be equipping teachers to be able to identify and to challenge the ways that discrimination, racism shows up. So I think that's the most important thing. Stop being embarrassed to talk about it. Curriculums need to reflect the whole wide history of our world, especially countries that have got that uncomfortable relationship with colonialization and empire building. Again, talk about it. It's not just something that happened in the past. As a citizenship teacher, my subject carries on from where history finishes. And so it's about talking about what happened then impacts on our lives today. It's not about shame. It's not about asking for apologies. It's not about just a reparation. It's about acknowledging the real experiences. Even in a school or in an area where it is a majority white area, you are still going to be feeling the repercussions of empire and colonization. And it comes through the loudest through the education system. One of the things, and I'm a really proud union activist, and I think that unions need to be open to criticism as well. So my trade union in the UK organises the largest gathering of racialised teachers in the whole of Europe, where we have sometimes nearly 400 racialised teachers coming from across the United Kingdom, and having that opportunity to come together in a space that is created by us and for us it's also important to recognize that started as just 5 people in a room. So if racialized teachers and staff want to have spaces to come together where they can just talk to each other in a space where they're not going to have people thinking that they're plotting to overthrow, I don't know, whether it's the government or the school authority, actually it's about having that space to be able to talk to and support each other. And a really forward thinking school leadership would create those spaces and permit those spaces. I think the other thing is that I kind of made a note of is schools need to understand how racism shows up, and it shows up in a number of different ways. So for example, it may be through the adultification of female girls' bodies, for example. It may be that so for example, I as a trade unionist had to negotiate with the school on their dress code for staff, which basically had this line in it that hair would be professionally presented. Now I have dreadlocks. My hair is not going to be considered professional by white standards, but actually within my community, it's just a hairstyle. And so it's about having those conversations so that we are able to identify without blame in most places, especially if you're being preemptive, but actually having those conversations in a safe and positive way, because schools have got a huge responsibility. And even if it is a majority white school or an only white school, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be talking about race. And I'll pass to Peace now.
Thank you very much, Michelle and Sony. I think based on what Sony and Michelle have said, I'll have to cross-reference a lot of it because it's the same in Ireland. But I'd like to go back to what Michelle had said about recognising barriers. Barriers is something that should be recognised a lot more. Like if you think of the context of Ireland, to get into primary school teaching, you need to have fluency in speaking the Irish language. If you don't have the Irish language, just forget about it. You'll have to work towards getting that qualification of speaking Irish to get into primary school teaching. And I think this is something that may hinder very well professional people that may have decided to apply to do teaching from international countries, finding it very hard to get into the teaching profession in Ireland because they're unaware of this need to have the Irish language to teach in primary schools. Even though there should be ways in which teachers that have many years of experience of teaching to be able to get into doing primary school teaching in Ireland without the need of having the Irish language. When you think of the likes as well of the context of the percentage of schools in Ireland that are Catholic schools, I think it's like 84% of schools in Ireland are ran by the Catholic Church. So it means that individuals and racialized teachers that may not be Catholic and do not have the Catholic cert cannot teach in any of those schools. So that means they're then left to the 14, maybe 15% of schools in Ireland that don't follow the Catholic patronage. So that in itself are some of the barriers that hinder racialized teachers to getting into teaching in Ireland. I also will answer this question based on the 3 contexts of the school leadership, unions, and academic institutions. So when I look at school leadership, I believe that inclusion should be proactive and not reactive. So it means that it shouldn't just be when something happens that's when school leadership decides to do something about it. If they already have anti-racism efforts emerged and like throughout the school culture, then this is something that they won't have to do as a way of being reactive when something happens. If they're already are aware of anti-racism practices or anti-bias practices, then it's something to be more proactive in. I also believe that schools should have mandatory anti-racism policies, like Sony would have touched on as well, that are not just disguised as anti-bullying policies. Because I find like in a lot of different schools, like in Ireland, that maybe I would have had school placement in, that they don't have anti-racism policies. It's not mandatory in Ireland. So that's something that I would love to see in schools. As part of unions, stronger collaboration between racialized teachers and their experiences. We have these experiences, we know what we're going through when it is that we might just walk into school for one day, and the type of interactions that we're getting from racialized students. So we should be hearing our voices amplified within unions. And I believe that they should also have a more active stance towards workplace discrimination as well. And lastly, to answer about academic institutions, more research on experiences of racialized teachers. I remember doing my final year research project last year and struggling to find these research that I needed actual proof to say, this is my point, believe me. But it was just really hard to find these type of research. So it would be amazing to get these researchers out there, because we have people that can do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Peace and Sonia and Michelle, for adding your points. I think there are so many interesting points and very important points being raised here. I also just want to give a shout out to Spark teachers or community, because I do think that this is also very important that school leaders are supporting racialized teachers becoming members of these separatist spaces, right? So it means, of course, that joining these meetings, so for your record, all of you joining, we are having the meetings in the evenings because that's when teachers are off from work. So that's when we can meet. Of course, in my opinion, that should be recognized as part of one's workday. It's preparatory work, right? To sustain your own well-being, your own health. So of course, that should be something that teachers should be compensated for, right? So you should not sit in your free time and spend the time on this. And the same, like supporting these kind of environments and acknowledge that it is a need that we have to come together in spaces where we can be validated for the experiences that we have, and we can support each other as well. So thank you so much for adding this. I'm also thinking in terms of the unions and even also school management, right? That thing of like, if you don't have any employees that are reflecting the members, it can also be very difficult to keep trying to push for them to actually understand the importance of those experiences, because they are very different from what the employees in the unions are having, right? So I think this is also that thing of like, how do we actually support like allyship? What does that actually look like? Which is a question we will address later on. Before this, because now we are already touching a little bit about how to sustain the well-being and the thriving of racialized teachers in school, I would like to ask you also about, because we do see there is a link between the well-being of teachers and the well-being of students. And we actually also see studies showing that having racialized teachers does enhance the well-being of students, right? Not only in terms of racialized students, but also other students, like racially majoritized students, right? Because they do see these different perspectives reflected. They do have this larger perspective on being minoritized, whether it's racially or it's otherwise. So it broadens for different perspectives, and it also allows for this critical approach to the curriculum that is already being presented. So I kind of want to ask the panelists here, how does you see the well-being of racialized teachers affecting the well-being of racialized pupils and reverse? So how are those two interlinked? And how do you see that school management in particular, but also everyone else, but school management in particular, could kind of use the one to kind of also enhance the other and like strengthen that tie, be more aware of this? And I think, Michelle, we're going to start off with you.
Thank you, Meta. And thinking about this, so a conversation I'd had a couple of weeks ago, and I shared it with Peace, was I was in a room of teachers who teach citizenship from across the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, Wales, all of the countries, as well as the Republic of Ireland. And I was sat next to a woman who just kept staring at me, and she's a teacher. And she said, I don't mean to be rude, but I've never met a racialized teacher before. And I said to her, well, in Ireland, I can even tell you there's only one who just qualified as a primary teacher talking about peace. And so it does make an impact. She was saying that if she'd have had racialized teachers or Black teachers when she was growing up, her whole perspective of the world would have been more inclusive. And she wasn't being rude. She was just saying, this is her experience. And I think this is what we go back to, because if our children and young people don't feel seen or don't feel safe in their schools, then for a start, why would they want to go into teaching? And we already know that there's a teaching supply crisis across not just Europe, not just the UK, but actually across the world. And so if we want people to become teachers, they need to see it. And so when it comes to talking about children, how are we going to say to communities, send your children to our school? It's a successful school if children and young people don't feel safe there. And they don't feel safe there either because they've seen the way that teachers that look like them have to battle against the system, or they don't have anyone at all. So therefore they become the focus of all the negative attention. So it's really important that, for local racialized communities, or as we can also say, global majority, because racialized people are the global majority, if they're not feeling that this local school is their school, then there definitely needs to be some work that happens between the school and the community. I think it was Sony who said earlier about racism being violent and safeguarding, and it absolutely is. It causes trauma, it causes harm, not just to that child or young person or to that teacher or to that adult, but actually it has repercussions through their family and through their community. So any good school leader would want their school to be seen in the best possible light, and they would want people to send their children there. If your school is not being one of the schools of choice for racialized or global majority communities in your area, then there needs to be some honest soul searching. And it may be having conversations with students or young people and their families who have either just joined the school or have left the school to find out what some of those issues are, because they aren't always evident. Just because you're a school leader, you have to admit that there are times when you don't know what's happening everywhere. And so having that space for children to be able to express and to say that what they're facing, what they're experiencing, in some cases what they're surviving, is crucial. And for me, that's a good example of good school leadership. I'm going to kick over to Sonny.
Thanks, Michelle. So representation matters, and therefore racialized pupils often confide in teachers who look like them. However, sometimes those issues or concerns can be outside of the teacher's role. And that's happened in many of my previous roles where, in one of my last schools, I consistently had Black and brown students who would come to talk to me about concerns that were happening at home as well as within school. And I would obviously, I would signpost them, towards, the support services within the school, the pastoral teams, etc. Because I myself, as the teacher, would have to safeguard and log these events and incidents as well. However, it was the same response every single time, but miss, they won't get it. But miss, they won't understand. So there needs to be, again, just coming back to kind of clear and thoughtful policies and procedures in place, to support, again, the well-being of the racialized pupils and racialized staff in school settings as well. And I feel like the well-being of racialized teachers should also be approached the same way as a safeguard, if there was a safeguarding incident logged as of a pupil, where there should be steps in place to kind of ascertain what may be needed for that teacher, but also that different racist events will require different also needs. So when we talk about racialized teachers, we're also not one homogenous group that go through the same experiences. There are different ethnic groups are going to experience different forms of racism. So again, that just needs to also be considered. And kind of coming back to kind of the structure, institutional structural racism. So where there are lots of schools have well-being initiatives and, things in place for pupils, but they need to be for everyone to access. So again, being mindful of the things that happen within your school community linked to racism and what that then looks like in your wellbeing initiatives within the school. I will pass it to Peace.
Thank you very much, Tony. When students experience racism, exclusion, discrimination, bias, I think feel like as racialized teacher, we then feel the responsibility of advocating on their behalf. And the reason I believe for that is because we've also experienced that as well. And I think that the comments or statements on, oh, we're a diverse school, although that's absolutely amazing and that's brilliant, shouldn't be used to hide the fact that, oh, actually we don't, for that reason, we don't need these anti-racism policies, or we need to work towards more inclusion. Because I went to a diverse school myself when I was in primary and secondary school, and I would say it was when I was in school myself that I experienced the most like blatant racism. Now I've unfortunately received racism outside of school context, but the fact that I went to diverse schools, those are one of the places that I experienced the most racism. So I think the fact that, you know, you might hear teachers or schools say, use that point of like our school being diverse, like we still need that mandatory anti-racism policies. Schools still need training on anti-bias and anti-racism and cultural competency as well. Because like Michelle said, like representation is extremely important. And I've heard this saying many times that you can't be what you don't see. And in the context of like Ireland, where a lot of the teachers in Ireland are the majority white Irish, in that case, as a Black child or as a brown child or any child from any different ethnic background, why would you think you could become a teacher when you don't see these teachers out there that look like me, you know? So yeah, definitely more mandatory anti-racism policies, worked on within school leadership, and recognizing that when students experience racism, discrimination, or exclusion, whether it's blatant or it's, what's the word to use? It's discreet, like it's still there, whether or not it's been shared, like it's still there. So that definitely needs to be recognized as well.
Great, you. Thank you so much, all three of you. I think this is such an important topic to touch upon. Also, like, obviously, this is also one of the reasons that we created Spark Teachers, to come together in a community like this. And we want to engage you now, the audience here, the participants joining us in this webinar, because we would like to ask you, does the place that you work, whether it's a school, a union, an organization, institution, whatever, do you have this awareness of like holding spaces specifically for racialized employees or racialized members of your organization? So this is actually a yes or no question, but maybe you're not sure. Maybe you don't know if something like this actually exists. So what we are thinking of here is that it's something that is facilitated through the workplace. So it's not if there are racialized teachers that have created something themselves externally. We are thinking here, is it something that is kind of institutionalized through the workplace, that is actually acknowledged that racialized employees or members can have that kind of space? Please share with us, what is your experience from your workplace? Yeah, and I think it's still the same link, right, Lisa? Yeah. Yeah, so we see that again, that it's not really something that is provided in the spaces, and actually most people are like certain that it's not existing there. And this is also what we find. And I could maybe just like ask a short follow-up question for the panelists. Like, is it something that you know of in the schools that exist in your country, or like the work, like, is it something that you are familiar with, that there are these kind of like separatist spaces? I know, Michelle, that you have the union in the UK, right? But do you experience like elsewhere that there are these spaces where racialized teachers can come together with the support of the management of the institution or their workplace? Feel free to just unmute and share if you have anything, any experience with this.
I think I know with my school, because my school is part of the new structure in the UK, which is the academy trusts, where groups of schools are no longer run by local authorities, but they're run by essentially private businesses. Even if they're academic, they're private businesses. I know in my trust they have started to do spaces specifically for women teachers, for teachers with disabilities, for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans plus teachers, and for racialized Black teachers as well. But it's very it's very small. It's a very small initiative. It's not very well known. My school is part of a 30 school trust which crosses county lines, county borders. However, it is there, it's self-organized, and it's a step in the right direction. Additionally, our multi-academy trust also gives staff time off to go and do it as well, to go and attend. So they will cover lessons if it happens during the school day, or there's an event that's happening during school day. So that's my school, my multi-academy trust. That's one thing they're trying to do. My critique of it is it's not well enough known about.
Great, thank you, Michelle. What about you, Peace? Do you have any knowledge of this in your context? Anything you want to add?
In terms of like spaces specifically for racialized employees, not particularly. I think Spark Teachers was the first place that I've heard that had like a space for racialized teachers. So when I was introduced to Spark Teachers by another racialized teacher in Ireland, I was extremely excited, and I was like, okay, I find my place basically. And at the moment in Ireland, no, Spark Teachers is where I find my space.
Do you want to add anything, Sony?
Yeah, so within my school setting, no. And then when I then looked for a space, these kinds of spaces outside of the school setting in the Netherlands, well, especially where the city I'm based, I couldn't find anything. Again, Spark Teachers came up, and that was when, I joined. But this is the only space that I've also found available.
Yeah, and I think this is also stressing why this network is so important, right? And it actually leads me on to the next question, because the next thing I would like to ask you, I touched a little bit upon it already, the thing of allyship, or we would like to call it like being a co-conspirator, right? Like that you actually take part in, so you put yourself on the line as it could be a racialized majoritized colleague, for example, or a leader being in leadership, or it could also be a member of the union. Or like an employee of the union. But how would you like to see that support from people? What would be your best advice that a school leader or a colleague or an employee in the union could do to support this agenda, support racialized teachers, support also anti-racism in general? And I would like to start with you, Peace. What would your advice be?
My advice would be to be proactive, not reactive, and listen to, observe, and address the things that racialized teachers are saying. We know what we're talking about, we know our experiences, and we know what our students are going through as well. So listen to us when we bring up any concerns, or racialized students also bring up concern. Move beyond allyship. And I say that because we need to challenge discriminations, policies, racist incidents, even when racialized teachers aren't there. Like, do not wait for the racialized teacher to be there before you challenge these concerns. And that's why I would also like to highlight as well, like in initial teacher education programs, that these events of like learning how to become an anti-racist educator shouldn't just be one-off events or events that you can choose whether or not you want to attend. They should be mandatory throughout initial teacher education programs. So it's not until a racialized teacher comes into the school and when there's concerns about racist incidents happening that you direct all these problems or these concerns to them, because it just brings it back to the fact that we have this excess role put onto us, whether it's recognized or it's addressed. These are things that should definitely be implemented in initial teacher education and professional continuous development for teachers that are already qualified and working in the teaching profession. Because I've found, like discussing with many different Irish teachers as well, that when it comes to talking about race or racism, they are aware that they're not confident themselves. And I think it stems back to the fact that perhaps they haven't really had to deal with racism before, or they've not experienced it. And for that reason, they don't know how to go about it in the best way possible. I would like to pass it on to Michelle now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's about not expecting racialized teachers to do that emotional labor as well. I'm really fortunate in my school where one of my colleagues, it goes way above and beyond being an ally. She absolutely will take on battles and the fights, and basically just tell me, you can sit this one out, I've got it. And she checks in with me, and it's not done without me. It's just that I'm not using my emotional labor for it. And I think this idea of moving from being allies to co-conspirators to co-collaborators, I think even we heard co-disruptors, I've heard used as well, that we've come into teaching because of many different reasons. And so it's important that we recognize the power of education. So for me, I've already said about that self-organization and that self-empowerment, but it's also about thinking about who is mentoring your staff and your teachers, who are the best placed people to help when it comes to not just talking about racism, but about career progression, which is about, sometimes it may be, let's help you get ready for your next role, which may be a member of senior leadership. It's about how what that support looks like. Sometimes allies are scared or worried that they're going to offend, and sometimes actually that's what causes inaction. And actually, this is why I strongly support and I'm really proud to be a member of ENAR, because it's sometimes it's about, how do we have that conversation, how do we start that conversation? And as you know, as long as you're willing to hear and to work through any positives and negatives that may come up, then it will be uncomfortable because you're changing a culture. So it's very much about getting that external support where you need it, to work with members of the community, but also be brave enough to admit you don't know the answer to everything and ask for that help when you're offered it. So I'm going to pass over to Sonny.
Thanks, Michelle. So for me, it's coming back to, again, sort of the structure of the school. So again, just ensuring that anti-racism policy and just, the idea itself is embedded within the wider school culture and systems, and then taking accountability and overseeing it is actually implemented and followed. So, a lot of the time we have policies there, but what's happening with them? Or is there regular meetings? Are the procedures being logged or followed correctly? How many teachers are logging actually incidents in the first place? How do teachers define what is racist and what isn't racist, and how do they come to that judgment? So not waiting, I think Peace has already mentioned this, so not waiting for incidents to happen in order for there to be to implement change. Sometimes we hear, well, is there, how many cases of racism were there within the school? Was it 1, 2, 3? It shouldn't matter, one's enough. So the numbers aren't relevant to the change that's needed within the school. And we are aware as well, as racialized teachers, that reporting is low, because both racialized staff and students fear the consequences a lot of the time. So yeah, schools need to therefore outline their position on anti-racism right from the start. And that's, again, making it very clear to staff that are new to the school, in the recruitment process, to parents, of where they stand and what their expectations are if you are joining the school as a pupil or as a staff member, but also just kind of defining the term co-conspirator as well. It's really important that a white member of staff acknowledges the disadvantages and oppression of the LGBT. And then, like you've mentioned, Matt, and everyone else, take risks and supports action on their behalf, because it is draining, it is emotionally taxing, and it doesn't just happen in school and then we leave school, you know, and go back to our lives. It really does affect us in every way. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think also what you're mentioning here in the end, Sony, is also related to the idea of professionalism, right? That also knowing that how do your voice come across differently, right? And how can you use that not? And I think, Michelle, your point of like, no, you should not speak on behalf of racialized teachers. You should support, right? So like that thing of like checking in, and also know like when are you willing to put yourself at the risk here, right? So take those difficult conversations. I remember like one of my previous colleagues was saying, oh, you always raise this question. You always raise this issue. You always address this. I'm like, yeah, because you don't. So like, I kind of have to do it. If you did it, I didn't have to do it, right? So there's also that thing of like, okay, but if we are talking about AI, but there is also anti-racism at play that we could introduce here, right? If we are talking about teachers' well-being, well, obviously, we can talk about it here. If we are talking about, you know, like bodily autonomy, same thing, we can also address it here, right? So it's in every aspect of life and of teaching. So very, very important. The next question that I want to ask you is something we have touched a little bit upon already, and I want to be a little bit mindful of time because we do want to have the 10 minutes in the end for the Q&A. So we have like, for now, we have around 10 minutes for the last two questions. And we did talk already a little bit about how we would like to see development of teacher training, but also like teachers who are already in the profession. How do we like to see them being continuously developed into dealing with these issues? So I would like to hear a little bit about your ideas. Maybe if you can elaborate a little bit about what you have already mentioned. And I think what could be really interesting here could also be, so Peace, for example, you mentioned that thing of like a teacher training should not just be like a development training should not just be a one-off. So like one workshop or one presentation, what should it be then? Like maybe like, do you have like anything, maybe like a quite specific thing? And also for Sonia and Michelle, if you have something like, so for example, teachers should be more aware of diversity, or teachers should be more aware of like representation matters. But what does that really mean in practice? What can a teacher like specifically do differently to acknowledge that representation matters? Yes, and I think maybe Peace, if you want to go first.
When I say that representation matters, like we need to see more racialized teachers. There are racialized teachers that have these qualifications, that are very well experienced, but we're not seeing them hired in the profession. So in terms of when it comes to employment, we need to see more racialized teachers because we're right there. We should be getting the jobs. Curriculum reform is essential, such as reflecting diverse histories and diverse stories. Like in the Irish context, a lot of the times now when you go into a classroom, the classroom can be very diverse, but when you look at who is up there and who's teaching you, that person is just another person that is part of the majority of what the teaching profession is like in Ireland, which again, 98% white Irish for primary school teachers. So we need to reflect the diverse experiences of all the students that are in our classrooms, in our colleges, and in the working profession as well. Listen to racialized teachers. Like, we are the experts of our lived experiences. as well as the racialized students as well. Like, I can tell you the amount of times, maybe like when I was in secondary school, and when you might bring up like a concern that may have happened and you weren't really taken seriously. And the moment that you may have mentioned at the time, it's racist, they'd be like, no, 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 no. They just didn't want to hear you anymore. So it's that thing of listening to us and actually taking us seriously. Because to put it quite simply, our voices should be central to shaping policies and practices in schools. I would like to pass it on to Sonina.
Thanks, Peace. Just coming back to what Met said and what that actually looks like in practice, and it's something that just popped into my head at that time, but it even begins with something as basic as your class register list. So when you have that and you are, getting to know your students, or you bond that rapport and relationship with your students, and you can clearly see, and once you've met your students, that you have students of color within your classroom, you then put things in place and you ensure that you're embedding sort of those anti-racism policies within your own classroom curriculum. So it starts as on that, ground level, sort of basic level, even there in terms of practice. But I'm gonna sort of brief some of the points because, again, sort of just mindful of time. But yes, staffing should reflect sort of pupil population, as representation again matters. Decolonizing the curriculum, so it should be a duty of all staff, not just racialized members of the school, starting with the subject leaders and coordinators as well, to reform teaching practice and their schemes of work, so reviewing the sort of curriculums for the year ahead. This should also be monitored and part of quality assurance within the school as well. Research and development, so listening again, as Peace has mentioned, to racialized teachers. We are experts of our lived experience, to quote unquote, literally, as Peace has said, and then gathering the feedback and implementing the change where needed. So this should be overseen again by leadership, and work should take place regularly throughout the academic year, not again as a one-off Google form that was conducted at the beginning of the year and then it didn't go anywhere. Do the work as well. So I think there needs to be a lot of independence and accountability on leadership staff, and again, heads of departments at all levels, to do the work themselves and ultimately stop making excuses. There's no excuse, I feel, with knowledge being at our disposal, to be ignorant of some of the things that happen within school settings. And lastly, I think this is probably the most important one. They're all important, but for me, I just want to highlight is consequences. So if a school implements policies, an anti-racism policy, or any changes relating to diversity, you are going to receive pushback from some staff, where they may express some negativity due to their own personal beliefs, etc. I think it's absolutely fundamental then that there are consequences for those staff members, and that they're reminded that their personal values perhaps don't align maybe with the school values. And then maybe there needs to be a further conversation, because again, coming back to our earlier conversations, if your anti-racism policies are successful policy, and you have successfully made it clear to parents and students and your staff your position of where you stand on that, then you cannot have staff members within your school setting that don't align with those policies or those values. I will pass it on to Michelle.
I think so much has been said already in today's session. I think for me, I want to just flip it just slightly and to say celebrate diversity. There are so many opportunities. Get a school calendar where you're recognizing religious festivals such as Eid or Hanukkah, recognizing maybe it might even be, to be really controversial, when particular countries got their independence and how they celebrate it. Saints' days. There's so many things that different communities can bring into a space. So, work with the local communities, identify what you want to celebrate, invite them in, as a school space, to say this is part of the community, invite them in to celebrate the richness. I'm going to give you one top hint, and we as all teachers know this: Food is the best leveler. So if you have a festival of food where children and their communities are bringing in food and learning how to cook from different communities and cultures, you are going to win. You know, it is about that celebration. Racism is heavy, racism is hard, and it is something that divides communities. So the most important thing is finding ways to bring communities together. And that, if I was to say if there's one thing you should try, it's about trying to bring in that celebration of diversity and the cultures that they bring. Oh, I did want to say one thing though as well. Sorry, in response to research. So I'm really fortunate. I'm doing my master's at the moment, and I know that there is research coming in from around the world of people who are interested in education and the experiences of racialized teachers and communities. So it's about making sure that we are working together, working, you know, if there are local researchers at the local university who want to do work around diversity and race and identity, then, you know, really strongly suggest that they work with other researchers in other parts of Europe, because the money is there, and those opportunities to look at and comparisons really do give strength to when you're talking about the overall picture of education.
Great. Thank you so much, all three of you. We have one last question before we open up the floor for another poll, and then we will open up for the Q&A. And this is just, yeah, but we just have one more question, Isa, before we go into the poll. Oh, but maybe it's already, yeah, because I just want to have this one, and I really want it also for the people watching on the recording. So one thing, and it's only one thing, not a list of things, only one thing that you think would be the most important thing that school leaderships should be aware of when they want to adjust for this changing needs of a more like diverse student population, like the racial diversity here. What is the one thing that you think that school leadership should be aware of when they are trying to adjust to this diversity in the student population when it comes to racial diversity? Yes, and I will start with Michelle this time. Yeah.
I think the first thing is to be brave and to recognize that language does matter. If you're going to have conversations around this, then make sure your language is correct. If you are allowed to make mistakes, as long as you correct and as long as you reflect to what you're being told, you can and are allowed to make mistakes, but get that language right. So I'm going to pass to Peace.
I think literally like what Michelle just said, you are allowed to make mistakes. Language is very important. And regardless, diversity should be celebrated. I think that's one of the things that makes the world and our understanding a lot much better. I would like to pass it on to Sonia now.
Please. So for me, I think change can only happen at the level of influence, and therefore it's imperative that institutions, school settings, academic institutions are investing in the career progression and development of racialized staff, specifically within leadership roles and spaces, because it's at that level where decisions, decision making takes place, and essentially you're speaking on behalf of your colleagues and teachers essentially. So it's at that level our voices then need to be heard as well and represented. And then courses and training should be dedicated and in place for all staff, again, not for racialized staff to find, we should have spaces for ourselves, but it is something that needs to be for all staff as well, particularly training. And then Spark Teachers, again, is another invaluable resource. So, also not in terms of labor, not just relying all the time on your racialized staff to provide you with the resources and the education and the information when there are external consultancies and resources like us out there to offer support as well and have invaluable knowledge.
Great. Thank you so much, all three of you. And now, Isa, now we would like the poll. So now we would like to invite you again to share with us how many racialized colleagues do you have within the place where you work. So it's not only if you work in a school or in a department, but it can also be if you work in an institution or in a union or where you might work at the moment, how many racialized colleagues do you have? And if you're not currently working, then you can look at your previous job or maybe where you got your education, how many racialized fellows were working there with you. All right. Yeah, so we have a few people who have above 10, and then we have a few people that have between 0 and 5. And feel free to share in the chat if you are one of the racialized colleagues that are working in your workplace, or if it's colleagues of yours. Great. Now we would like to open the floor for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to come off mute and share the question with us, or you are also welcome to write your question in the chat and then we will take it there. We would, of course, encourage you to come on with your picture, your camera. So feel free to do that. If you prefer not to do so, as we are recording, we totally respect that. And the same with your voice. If you prefer not to have your voice on the recording, we would also respect that. Then feel free to write your question in the chat. Yes. So we will just allow a little bit of time for that. And while people might be typing or thinking about questions, then maybe I could start with asking Isa. Maybe Isa, if you want to paste the link for Spark Teachers landing page, because then of course, if you know, now you heard about the reality of racialized teachers in the school, and the support that is needed and that we see would be very helpful for this context. If you know any teachers out there identifying themselves as being racially minoritized or racialized, then you can send them this link for the landing page to sign up to become a member of Spark Teachers. We meet regularly once a month on Zoom, and then we have a yearly meetup once a year where we come together. Okay, so there is a question here in the chat. So I read it out loud, and then if we can have the panelists share their thoughts on it. So the question goes, do you have any literature you would recommend to inform anti-racist policies in employment and education? And maybe, Sonia, would you like to go first on this one?
Not off the top of my head, but I don't know where you're based, sorry, but if you sort of, even with me, and since I've been based in the Netherlands, I've been trying to research kind of information and as much literature as possible. But within a Europe context, there's so much information out there that I've read. It's sort of the European Commission has, published so many reports on findings and statistics within a European setting. So for me, I kind of have literature for that. But my advice would be wherever you're based, again, I know it's the labor yourself in terms of finding the research. So maybe if you're not in the position or in the role of having to conduct this anti-racism policy, then it should be the people within that role that are doing the work to find the literature themselves, and then gathering the feedback and from the racialized people within the school setting about what that looks like. But yeah, that would be my sort of advice.
Yeah, Michelle, do you have anything you want to add?
Again, I mean, one thing I'm really clear of, just because the UK seems to be a couple of steps ahead doesn't mean that the UK have got it right. The UK still gets it wrong on so many different levels. However, saying that, obviously ENAR, the foundation and work that they do would be a very good first step to try and start that conversation about what should be in a policy. There are also, even if I was to talk about the union websites or the government the government education websites in the UK do have policies as well that people can adapt and change. I think it has to work for your setting, but most importantly, it has to be agreed and it has to be consulted and discussed. It's not something that senior leader just brings on in the last item on a Friday meeting before everyone wants to go and everyone just votes and then that's it. It needs to be something that needs to be living and breathing. I would also say consult on it with kids as well, but I would because I'm a citizenship teacher.
And can I just quickly add to that as well? When sort of, working alongside external consultancies and agencies as well, make sure they actually reflect what you're trying to do, because a lot of anti-racism or D&I consultancies don't reflect racialized teachers.
Very important point. Peace, do you want to add anything to this?
Off the top of my head as well, I can't really think of much, but I totally agree with Sony and Michelle. I think one piece of literature that I could think of from the top of my head, if you're based in Ireland, I'm not sure, is on building a Black inclusive curriculum. And that was created by the organization Black and Irish.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Peace, also for sharing that. Okay, Ireland and the US. Great.
So
Yeah.
it was mentioned that ENAR and ENAR Foundation have developed some resources. I don't have anything specific for the school context, but we have developed a bunch of toolkits just for workplace in general, and they focus on specific topics. So I'm going to maybe paste here some links, but yeah, you can have a look like what is there. There is about mental health at workplace, there is about women of color, there's about religious accommodation, there's a few specific topics that I think apply to any workplace, school included.
Great, thank you so much, Isa. I also think for especially when wanting to create something anti-racist, I really think it's important also to dare to name whiteness, especially in a European context, because we don't really have a language around what is whiteness and what does whiteness actually mean. So I really think that looking into literature studies around whiteness and there, Sarah Ahmed is definitely a scholar to look out for because he has done a lot of things. There is one of the studies that we have also used here is like phenomenology of whiteness, which is this critical perspective to what does whiteness mean and what does it mean when it becomes like a hidden normal that is the point of origin for everything but never named. So that could definitely also be something to look into, and just like critical race theory in general. So like root the arguments within that could definitely also be a recommendation from me.
So I was just going to say, Mette, could we put together a small resource sheet to go out with this video, and then we can come up with, lots of different resources that are quite accessible? I think that might be quite helpful.
Yes, I think that is a great idea, and it actually leads me on to the next thing I wanna, yes, in the Padlet, that's true, Isabella, so we could definitely create like a column, because that leads me on to, because we are quite, unfortunately, coming to an end, but we do want to stay in contact with you, and ELNE had allowed us to send you an email, a follow-up email after this webinar, so that will go out next week, and there we would add feedback form that we would like you to fill in. There will also be a link for a Padlet where there is an opportunity for you to share resources. So that could, for example, be your experience of best practices. We also ask a question around what are the emotions that can show up in you when you are to talk about race, because we are really curious to also learn more about what are the different emotions that this evokes, but also what can be the difficulties of addressing this topic. And also for us, because we also do professional development within Spark teachers, so we also help school leaders to do professional development with their staff. So we're also curious to know more about what are the emotions that can be difficult to start this conversation basically from the other side. So please do share with us that, and there it would be great to also add different resources that we have. If there is other topics that you would like to hear us speak about, we also really recommend you to share that with us, because we would like to, of course, follow up on this and also do additional talks, because we do have a lot of on our hearts to share with you, and to, of course, also influence the educational agenda in Europe. Yes. Is there anything I have forgotten? Yes, of course, share the link for Spark Teachers with everyone you know that you think could have an interest in becoming part of this member. We don't measure people's amount of melanin, so it's like a self-identifying community. So if you know someone that identifies as a racialized teacher, they're very welcome to reach out to us. It is an acting teacher community. So if you did teach once, but now you are in academia, then we have Spark Teachers Academia. That would be the network for you. Then it's not Spark Teachers. So we do want people who are in the profession. Yes. Let me know if there's anything I have forgotten, because I think, yes, Nadira, welcome, welcome. Can I give a short introduction of you being the chair of Spark Academia? So thank you so much also for being here, Nadira. Let's hear what you have. Yes.
I have a very small a consideration for all of us. And as you all know, I'm Dutch and I'm South African, and I was born and raised in apartheid South Africa. And so I belong to a Black community, and we're very much languaging racism now. And you specifically, Meta, spoke about whiteness. Can we actually, instead of calling ourselves racialized, because everybody, including white people, are racialized, can we call ourselves Black, as in the political Black term that defined apartheid? Because I am Black, and I will always consider myself Black. So maybe it helps to think about it in terms of a political identity of Blackness, so that we can create more solidarity, as opposed to calling ourselves racialized, which actually flattens the term and doesn't show the ways in which structural racism works.
Great. Thank you so much for this comment, Nadira. And I think this is really also a great comment to kind of like close us off here, because it really shows how language is powerful, right? But also how language is something that is fluid and something that changes all the time, and something that also differs across like what are the terms that are being used. And I think even within the Spark communities and within ELNE Foundation, there is a lot of different opinions about what language to use, what term to use. But I definitely think this is an interesting conversation to have. I think for this purpose, as of today, I really want to leave people with like dig into the concept of whiteness, and then from there try to develop a language around it, and definitely bring this perspective with you. We also use like people from the global majority here. This is also a term that could be used, right? So thank you so much. Exactly, language is so related to power dynamics. Exactly. I want to ask the panelists in the end here, do you have a last comment you want to leave people with? Because then I think that I would really invite you to close us off with whatever you would like people to take away from here. And maybe, I don't know, Sonia, do you want to go first?
Yeah, just thank you to everyone who's joined and given up their time for today. And hopefully you feel motivated, inspired by everyone's kind of the whole discussion, and that it doesn't just stop here. The work continues. And yeah, thank you.
I don't know, Michelle, do you want to go next?
Yeah, and I did want to say thank you, everyone who's in this space. For some of you, you're in the audience because you just wanted to see other racialized Black global majority teachers, and to know that you're not alone. That is such a powerful draw when you realize that you aren't in this alone. But also to the school leaders who have thought, might not be here now, but maybe watching it later and are kind of thinking, how do we start the journey? All I'm going to say is be brave and recognize that there are people out there who are going to benefit from any work that you start. And it's about not being on your own as well. And I absolutely take about language. I recognize as well that it changes, it's different on so many different fronts. I've always liked global majority Korea.
To finish off, I would also like to say many thanks to everyone that's here today and for taking the time, and to anyone that does decide to listen to this later on, thank you very much. I think a finishing sentence I would say is that there's so much we can do when we decide to all come together and listen to one another, and there's so much we can learn and hopefully make real positive changes together.
Thank you so much. I just want to close us off with like a huge thank you to all three panelists. Thank you so much for being here, not only today, but of course also in the Spark Teachers community. And if anyone watching this would like to join us, you are so welcome. We would really love to have you with us, because language is power, numbers are also power. So of course, growing this network is also one of the things that we are really hoping to do, so that we can have a strong voice out there where it really matters. As Sonia also said, like change also happenings around the big tables, where we would of course like to have a voice. So thank you so much to everyone who's here. We really do hope that you will both share this recording when it gets out, but also that you will share the link for Spark Teachers. Thank you so much to ELNE for allowing us to have this platform for this hour and a half. It has been a huge pleasure. So wishing everyone a great evening, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Meta.
Wow.